started? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to your Public Works and Gangs Reduction Committee. I'm joined by my colleague council members Buscaino, Martinez, Rue, and Rodriguez. And we will start with some general public comment, or we're going to start with the multiple public comment card items. Just to let folks know what, as an intention, what I plan on doing just when we get started is to continue item 1. So we're not going to hear that today. Still needs a little bit more meat on those bones. And then I'm going to propose moving items 6, 7, 8, and 9 on consent. And then when we start, because one of our colleagues wants to come in and he's on a time schedule on items 4 and 5, we're going to take up items 4 and 5 first, followed by items 2, and 3. That being said, we'll get started on the multiple comment card, multiple items. And I believe the first speaker is Ms. Ramirez. Are you here, Ms. Ramirez? Oh.
Very much. Does that include public comments?
And do your multiple comment cards, multiple comment, and
okay.
Which is 2 minutes.
Thank you.
And your general public comment, which is an additional minute.
Very much. Number 7. Why don't you change the entire name of Midway Lane to Combat Fighter Pilot Lane? That sounds a lot more enticing. And number 8. Well, blow me down. Mitchell Englander actually wants to do a good deed and name a street after a fireman killed in a fire. I remember staying up all night, reading up on this atrocious article on several firemen that were killed in 7-foot flames, surrounded by these wall of fires. And when I was going to present that to the public safety meeting, there Mitchell Englander had the audacity of throwing me out. And not to mention that there were several firemen killed, or excuse me, several firemen were present at that meeting when he kicked me out. And unlike something so I could not believe it. They actually made a movie of this. I had prepared it all night long and wanted to talk about this, the heroic acts of these wonderful, brave men with balls that Mitchell Englander could never have in this lifetime or the next. And so what happened was it really touched me about these firemen, the pain and the suffering, the torture that they must have felt right before they were roasted and burned and charbroiled, right before they were died. And thank you, Hollywood. You actually did a good thing and you made a movie. I have not seen it. I'm dying to see it. Thank you. And number 9, the Clean Streets, L.A. No, we are not going to clean L.A. What you need to do is deport these chango, wetback, gangbanging pussies, and then we can disinfect and sanitize L.A. Again, we are, this is a waste of money and it's outright fraud. We have a Latino chango gang epidemic and you want to spend impoverished middle-class money to clean the streets of LA. So again, are you kidding me? First, again, we need to clean our streets first for our beloved United States military veterans who are now homeless and impoverished and are homeless, legal law-abiding females. I ain't talking about changa females, gangbangers and wetbacks. I don't give a crap about them. I'm talking about American women who have been neglected and denied equal justice under the law and protection and safety from America. But again, we want these venomously jealous, nosy, wicked, come caca, uncivilized savages and racist hate-mongering and Latino assholes deported. And Eric Garcetti is a pig. He did not clean LA as he promised. All his promises were nothing more than fraudulent to get him elected. Again, LA stinks. LA is unsafe. You ever heard of that song by Human League? Nobody walks in LA. LA is unsafe and it stinks. And Eric Garcetti should be shot because the man is a bloody pig. LA stinks. Look at Glendale. Look at several other cities. They are safe and they're clean and they're beautiful. And the council members are fantastic and they don't censor you. So again, do not vote for Eric Garcetti. He's a fucking pig. And we want some class. We want to eradicate homelessness, and God bless America.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. Thank you.
Okay. Does that include my public comments?
You went through your 3 minutes.
Oh,
you did your 2 minutes on items, and then you did an
I'm
additional
sorry.
minute on general
I apologize. I thought you would stop us like Councilwoman Nori Martinez did. Stop us.
I figured since it was
sorry.
so off topic, it must have been the
No,
general
it wasn't
public.
off topic.
I mean,
It actually was so much in topic.
yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
I figured it
Yeah.
was general
so
public
again,
comment.
in topic.
Okay. Next one, the next one I'm assuming this is Mr. Herman, but there's no comma here, so it says F.U. Herman. So it's either someone who doesn't like Mr. Herman or Mr. Herman you don't like yourself. Either way, come on up.
Kind of like bipolar, isn't it? Kind of like when the city of Los Angeles suffers its mental health. But you see, on the items of public notification for new construction activities within public right-of-ways, AB 60, wetbacks want to sell on our sidewalks and streets. Why that? Why do you want to infringe on the rights of people with disabilities who have limited access and path of travel for their safety? Why do you want to create more slip and fall incidents like was discussed today during public meetings? I'll tell you why. Because we have a hachibo fool who talks about the pathways for analytics programs. Now, I'm not too savvy in speaking pig language like Paul Kretz, but you know, Mr. Kretz talks about the West Side Coalition.
You're now in general public comment.
Yeah, West Side Coalition, the issue of necessary permits when you still allow wetbacks to sell on the streets without permits. Now, if I went to the boardwalk and wanted to sell my chinchero on the sidewalk there, I'm being told I cannot. You did it to Michael Hunt, you did it to Matt Dow, you did it to Wayne Spindler, speaking their mind out and talking about why the hell we can't have a coalition that is equal and not segregated. And the other point about Ben Carson, oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about Harris Dawson, who looks like Ben Carson, who's constantly sleeping in our meetings, bring to mention fabricating honorary street signs on behalf of dead firemen. Well, they're fucking dead. You should honor them while they're alive. Give them respect and honor like we do to every military in response. In addition, oh, I got a call. Call you back later. So now underwater. Who's underwater? I'll tell you who's underwater. Underwater is Herman Jason Wesson, a.k.a. Herb, for blackmail and risk of homelessness himself. That's him calling me. Shut up, Herman. Shut the fuck up. No, I'm talking about Herman Jason Wesson, our president here in L.A., who is reckless, like his home at Virginia Road and the other in L.A. 2 homes and the motherfucker can't budget a mortgage. Who's worse than that? Who's underwater now? You, Herbie. At least I got a home to surf couch, so to speak. You nigga gotta go begging the city to steal more money from people. And the Armenian Holocaust never happened. They stole from the Ottoman Empire and they got what they deserved.
Time's
a war.
Up. Thank you. Next we have Mr. Spindler. Mr. Spindler, let the record reflect Mr. Spindler is not here. That closes the multiple agenda item speakers as well as general public comment. Well, actually, no, we have one more that is for item 6 and for general public comment. So let me bring up Belinda Hoody. Ms. Hoody, H-O-O-D-Y. You here? Okay, not here. We have one other that is for 2 items. Pratima Manga. Oh, that's for general public comment? Okay. Okay. Ms. Manga, if you could come on up for general public comment. I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Hello, would all 4 of us be allowed to come up together to quickly say a general comment towards item 4?
You're the only one who signed up for general public comment?
Yeah, I apologize for that.
But you want to speak on item 4, or?
Yeah. Can I bring my friends with me?
They can come stand behind you, but.
Only I'm allowed to speak.
Right now we're doing general public comment. You
no,
signed up for
we'd
general.
just like to speak for 4. I think I signed up for the general on mistake.
Okay, then we'll bring you up when we do
For 4. Thank
for number
you.
4. And if anyone else wants to speak on item 4, they need to sign up individually as well. Okay, that closes general public comment. General public comment is now closed, and we will move on, as I mentioned, to starting with item 4. Mr. Espinosa, would you please read item 4 into the record?
Item number 4 is a categorical exemption and motion from council members Kretz and Blumenfield with regard to the Boring Company's proof of concept tunnel project. Consideration of whether the project is categorically exempt under the CEQA guidelines and related actions regarding the necessary authorizations and permits for the project.
Great. And on this item, we have 4 public comment cards. I'll take those comment cards, and then we'll have Mr. Kretz speak after the 4 items of public comment. So, Pratima Manga, Russell Tran, Souvir Kaparam, and William Wang. Actually, there's another one, Robert Wreath, as well. You can come up and line up if you prefer, if you wanted to do it that way. We're going to do Mr. Kretz after he's waiting for the next.
Hi, my name is, does the time start now? My name is Russell Tran, and I am an undergrad at the University of Southern California. I'm currently a freshman studying biochemistry, and I'm here to give support for the Boring Company's proposed project. Us 4 here are from a student organization called Spark SC, and basically we're interested in promoting entrepreneurial initiatives to spark entrepreneurship in Los Angeles, and so that's why we think this is such a great idea. And we really do believe that LA has the potential to become the next Silicon Valley. Recently, Amazon declared that its newest headquarters would be here, and a lot of venture capital is coming to the area. So we think that initiatives like the Boring Companies is a way to promote innovation in a city that has very much potential to take advantage of it and flourish. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hey y'all, I'm Souvir. I'm also part of the same group as Russell. He provided a lot of the context. I was more interested in speaking on just this general idea I have about mobilizing privatized efforts to improve government infrastructure. So this past weekend I participated in a mobility hackathon programming competition where we got to speak with Deputy Mayor Chun and some other people in government about improving LA's transportation infrastructure. And after a lot of those conversations, I believe that anything we can do as a city to privatize these efforts rather than dealing with spending government funding on those things is generally a positive for both parties. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Forward.
Hi, my name is William. I'm a junior at USC. Part of the same group as Russell, Souvir, and Pratima here. And we're all students at USC, and I guess coming to USC, I've seen firsthand the amount of traffic congestion that there is, having to go around the city for different things. And while LA's roads are one of the most efficient in the nation, the amount of people that are attracted to LA for the abundance of opportunities here really kind of keeps the city congested. And being part of Spark SC and trying to promote the entrepreneurship, I guess sphere in LA, and seeing the prominence of the entertainment sphere as well as different verticals in LA, I truly believe that supporting the Boring Company in helping make LA's transportation scene better is the right thing to do. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Pratima Manga. I am a rising junior here at USC and part of the same student organization as Russell, Souvir, and William. And I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear us out. I've seen firsthand, just like William, the traffic issues that we have around LA, especially in front of USC. For the past 2 years, I've lived in the same dormitory on Figueroa Street, and I've seen firsthand just how much traffic issues and constant road work needs to be done there. I think that there's a lot to be gained in supporting the Boring Company and helping privatize efforts to redo and improve upon LA's road work, and I would love to see LA stand behind them in doing so. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Robert Wreath. I reside in David Rue's district. The proposed categorical exemption is essentially a speed-to-market subsidy for the Boring Company, and as a subsidy that Metro is evidently not eligible for. Giving the Boring Company a head start on a Sepulveda Pass project set the stage for the tired but classic, the private market is more efficient than the government, when in fact it's elected officials giving advantages to the private sector that the government sector does not receive. In addition, the proposed exemption has no requirement for coordination between the Boring Company and Metro for the most significant public works project since the Owens Valley Aqueduct. Why give away something of value without getting anything in return, such as a requirement of coordination between the Boring Company and Metro? The last great public good, the ground beneath our feet, needs to be more responsibly managed than this giveaway to the public sector, to the private sector. I supported and voted for Measure M. I do not support and would not vote for this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more comment on this item that just came in from Mr. John Given.
Thank you, council members. I guess I just got in under the wire, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Mostly I wanted to speak to just draw your attention to a letter that was just submitted on behalf of Brentwood Residents Coalition, an organization in Brentwood that deals with public policy issues around transportation, local land use, and planning issues. I agree entirely with the last gentleman. The gist of our letter is that the Class 32 exemption is entirely inappropriate for this sort of project. Moreover, this is sort of a classic piecemealing under CEQA. You can't really consider this to be a project, just this one segment. You really have to look at the foreseeable project, which is the entire scope of the project should it go forward and be approved. So we hope you'll have a look at our letter, and in addition, we really hope that there'll be a more full public hearing process so that members of the community can be properly informed and weigh in. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much. And now we're going to hear from Councilmember Kretz, whose motion this was, moving forwards. After Mr. Kretz, we'll hear from our Bureau of Engineering folks, as well as our city attorney. So Mr. Kretz, the floor is yours, and thank you for bringing this forward.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and colleagues. I'd like to respectfully request that you support the approval of issuance of permits to the Boring Company. Los Angeles has long been known as one of the most heavily congested cities in the country. Unfortunately, this situation continues to grow worse each year, and the city needs to prioritize more expeditious public transit construction and opportunities. I believe that if the tunnel process permit passes all of the environmentally required steps, this could be a great solution in providing high-speed transit and high-efficiency transit to Los Angelinos. The Boring Company technology would enable zero-emission vehicles to increase transportation speed and safety while remaining environmentally responsible. I had a great conversation with Elon Musk yesterday, who puts his full confidence in this project, and he agreed to work closely with the city to ensure our well-being. The first phase at committee today is essentially a hearing on whether a BOE excavation permit should be granted. This phase will just be testing the drilling component. BOE had Boring Company conduct a 1,500-page survey and study on all of its ramifications already. In addition, this is the environmental review authorized by the city of Hawthorne. Hawthorne has already constructed a tunnel and is currently running simulations. The mayor's office is also in support, and as you know, Mayor Garcetti is the chair of Metro. Obviously, there's a significant permitting process and environmental review ahead, but this project has the potential to be a world-class transit system alternative to the automobile. In an age when severe climate disruption is already upon us, we need to seriously consider the potential benefits, which include dramatically reduced traffic, air pollution, and a sharp reduction to our climate footprint. let me highlight a few important points. There will be a full EIR, and the Bureau of Engineering has already been provided a 1,500-page report. This will be paid for by the boring company, and they will indemnify the city. New ideas and technology can be daunting. However, if this is successful, we're talking about revolutionizing our transit system and making a major dent in improving traffic issues in Los Angeles and filling the gaps in our transit system, which will allow transit to become a more practical alternative to the automobile. Again, I ask for your aye vote to authorize the LA City Bureau of Engineering and other city departments to issue any and all permits necessary to construct the boring company's proof of concept tunnel. And again, this is just proof of concept. This is not the project itself. This is just the very beginning step, toe in the water. So I ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kretz. Now we want to bring up Ted Allen and Jan Rebstock from the Bureau of Engineering. Podium, if you could provide us an overview of the project and specifically the actions that we're being asked to take today.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. Ted Allen, Deputy City Engineer with the Bureau of Engineering. The boring company has applied to the Bureau of Engineering for an excavation permit, which was issued and subsequently would also require a revocable permit to occupy the space within the public right-of-way for this 2.7-mile pilot tunnel. One thing I'd like to point out is that we've seen some of the public comment already about segmentation. I've heard a little bit today, and I think it's important to point out this pilot project is not the first piece of some bigger known project. There have been some schematic visions of what this future thing may be, but there is no bigger project that this is a first phase of. This is a concept project to see if there will be a bigger project, and some of those schematic vision documents by the boring company have already changed from their initial ones of what that might be, but I very much expect that if it moves forward, that would change greatly when they get into actual planning on that. So the Bureau of Engineering feels very comfortable with our recommendation that the categorical exemption is appropriate and that there's no segmentation in this project. So the actions before the council today largely relate to a municipal code requirement that if someone wants to construct a tunnel in the public right-of-way, the excavation permit that the Bureau of Engineering would issue would require City Council approval. That's under Section 62.02 of the Municipal Code. So normally we issue excavation permits without coming to City Council, but tunnels specifically require City Council approval. Because of that approval, also requires the City Council would need to approve the categorical exemption, or the appropriate, in this case, categorical exemption, but the appropriate CEQA determination for the project. So those are the two actions before the City Council, essentially, is to authorize BOE to issue the permits once our review of this project application is complete, and to also make the CEQA determination that the Class 32 exemption is appropriate for this project. Any questions?
Yeah, a couple. And just so you know, I mean, for me, the authorizing of the permit is the easy part. It's the CEQA exemption that gives me some heartache in trying to figure that out. Because I think we all probably agree it's a very exciting idea, innovation, and we want to make sure we're on the right side of innovation and reducing traffic, and all of those things are, big deals, I think, for me and for all of us. But then we have to sort through some of the legal issues and figure this out. A couple of baseline things. I mean, and I should say before even going into that, I'm certainly, with regard to the question about Metro, I'm going to ask that we do a recommendation, no matter what we do, that Metro review and approve as a condition of the permit issuance to make sure that there are no conflicts with future Metro projects. So I know that that's an issue, but I just want to put out on the table that I'm going to be asking that as an additional condition, we put that on there, because we certainly don't want to have something that's going to conflict with a Metro tunnel. But
right, and we completely agree. We plan to do that as part of our permit review process anyway, but we certainly support that being a condition of the action.
Put that one issue to bed real quick, just right, so at least we know what we're thinking. Now, excavation versus tunnel. When is a hole a tunnel? I mean, at some point, if if it doesn't go anywhere, you could call it a hole. But at some point, because you're clearly allowed to do excavations without this kind of permitting, but when there's a tunnel, and I tried looking up in the dictionary, and tunnel usually has to go from one place to another, but this is clearly, it's not going anywhere, it's just going into the ground.
Right.
But it is triggering this tunnel issue.
I think, at least for the Bureau of Engineering, and different people may have different legal interpretations of what was intended for when a tunnel permit is required, but we look at it from the engineering point of view as if you're using tunneling technology to install it, and it's, kind of a circular oval path below the ground would be kind of what we think of as tunnel. There is an exemption in the municipal code for tunnels that, I forget the exact language, but essentially serve as utilities. So for example, when we tunnel for a sewer project, those utility type tunnels are exempt from requiring council approval. So I think it was intended more for when they're conveying people or other things. In this case, this project would not have any public operation. There would be no public use of this tunnel allowed under this pilot project. They would require some subsequent project if they ever wanted to do that, and it would have to have its own environmental review. But we still see it as a tunnel and still see it as requiring council approval in our interpretation of that municipal code requirement.
And this proof of concept, how is it different than what's being proved in Hawthorne with the tunnel that they have?
It's probably fairly similar in concept to what's being done in Hawthorne. What may differ is after the tunnel's constructed, what types of things the boring company tests within them as far as technology. But the tunnel itself will be very similar as far as the diameter, the construction type. But even in Hawthorne, they have, they're using it as a way to find ways to gain efficiencies. So they've already, transitioned away from the conventional diesel locomotive. Now they're using an electric locomotive. They've found ways to construct their own concrete liners of the tunnel. So that construction methods, that's kind of one of the things they're testing. But also once it's completed, they may test different types of vehicles within them and whatnot. So I see it as very similar, but they may test separate things within it, is what I envision.
And when the council authorization is received, when does BOE anticipate the permits actually get issued?
It would depend a lot on when we receive the final design package. So we've been doing things kind of progressively in phases as far as review, which makes sense from both sides. We started out with a preliminary alignment submittal from them, started looking at utilities, what things may be in the way. There have already been some refinements to that alignment. The next phase will be they'll be turning in detailed geotechnical borings, and we'll do the detailed structural analysis. But it makes sense to make sure you kind of have the alignment worked out before you go to that step. So we're guessing in the maybe 2-month range, could be a little sooner, could be a little longer, but it depends a little bit on how quickly we get things from them.
And then you come back to council for an update once we've done this, or how does that, what other steps have to come back to council?
It wouldn't be required per the municipal code to come back, but we certainly can come back if you wanted a report update, or it's up to the council what you would want.
And you'd be issuing a revocable permit, right? So what would the conditions be for that type of permit?
We've started to meet with the city attorney to work out what those conditions will be. We haven't finalized them, but the reason for the two permits, they need permission to construct, which is the excavation permit, but then they need permission to occupy the right-of-way. If you're, say, a franchised utility or something like that that already has the right to occupy the right-of-way under a state franchise agreement or something like that, then they wouldn't need a revocable. But in this case, because they're still in a pilot phase, they don't have any kind of local franchise agreement, state franchise agreement, they need the permission to be in the right-of-way. So we're not selling them, we're not giving them an easement, we're not selling any property, we're just allowing them to be in our public right-of-way. That would be the purpose of the revocable permit. So we will look at things like, what if they go out of business? What if they decide they don't want the tunnel? What are their maintenance requirements under the tunnel? So we'll have conditions in that revocable permit that protect the city, and we'll work with the city attorney to make sure that, we feel satisfied that the tunnel will be safe and remain to be safe in the future.
And in terms of requiring them for bonding or capitalization? How?
There definitely will be bonding, a few different types of bonds. We'll have bonding during construction. Let's say they went out of business during construction. We'll have bonding so that the city could finish work to the extent that we wanted to, or make sure it's ended safely. There will also be some kind of ongoing bond in the revocable permit, again, in the case they went out of business or stopped being cooperative or something, which we don't anticipate, of course, but we need to protect the city with all of our permits. So the tricky thing with the tunnel is, oftentimes, let's say it was a very short little improvement, the bond amount would be the amount it takes to replace the whole thing, or what if the whole thing failed? But in this case, we'll work with the city attorney to try to figure out the appropriate risk level, because we don't anticipate, the entire length of a tunnel having a problem. If they were to stop mid-construction, if they decided they didn't want to do the project anymore, the part that's completed would already be okay. There would only be a little bit in transition. So we'll be figuring out that bond amount, but it will probably be like some percentage of the actual valuation.
Will be protected for all of those hard costs. And then what about legal costs? Is there a, and I think I may ask that we do make sure that there is a indemnification, but currently is there a requirement that they indemnify us for all legal costs associated with?
Yeah, we have that already. And the Board of Building and Safety Commissioners has already approved a haul route approval, which did have some very strong indemnification language in it. And the boring company they've agreed to defend. Let's say if the seek was challenged or something like that, they've agreed to defend the case and to cover city costs. But we will definitely ensure that type of language is in our permits.
So all of that would be in there. And I would certainly add a recommendation to make that patently clear that we have as a permit condition that we're indemnifying the city for all costs, including legal.
Sure.
Colleagues, I don't want to. Mr. Buscaino.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to recognize Mr. Kretz, who has led this effort. I know firsthand in my discussions with Mr. Kretz, the number one issue from his residents' constituency is traffic, and especially that Sepulveda Pass. I also recognize Mr. Bonin's concerns as a Metro board member that ensure that this is seamless in the planning of this project once we get there with our colleagues at the Metro board and Phil as well. I want to recognize the USC students who came to testify and push for this. I see you, your eyes, and you're so excited about innovation in our city, and I think about my 14-year-old and my son, my 11-year-old daughter, who we are truly planning the future for them. So I want to recognize the students who are here as well. Thank you for your testimony. So to BOE, the categorical exemption narrative, and I'm in reading the report, clearly, based on what the report that's out, clearly is exempts from CEQA. Is that what you're saying?
We're recommending that the City Council find that the Category 32 exemption is applicable and approved.
This is not a decision you came overnight, obviously. You've been working with the boring company for how long?
It feels like a long, long time, but it's probably only been a few months. But it's been, I forget the exact start date, but we have had a lot of meetings. They've done a lot of work. We asked for a lot of studies to justify that there wouldn't be any potential significant impacts, which is one of the requirements.
Over a 1,000-page report that you provided?
Correct. They prepared and we reviewed, and we agreed with them that there are no foreseeable potential significant impacts.
So reading the basis for the exemption, A, the project is consistent with the applicable general plan designation. B, the proposed development occurs within city limits. C, the project site has no value as habitat for endangered, rare, threatened species. D, approval of the project would not result in any significant effects relating to traffic, noise, air quality, or water quality. And finally, E, the site can be adequately served by all required utilities and public services. So colleagues, this is a no-brainer. There may be talk of continuing this. We cannot continue an item that's going to delay innovation to our city and help move traffic. In fact, I understand Metro's position. with the rail lines that are being installed throughout the city of Los Angeles. Clearly, there's no rail line coming to San Pedro, so if there's an issue of rail and disruption, Mr. Musk can come down to San Pedro and connect the city by bringing the loop to San Pedro. In this recent announcement that the big Falcon rocket's going to be assembled down at the port, he needs to find a way to get down there, he and his 700 employees. So we welcome any and all innovation into our district. But with that, we need to encourage innovation. Let's not overcomplicate this. There may be talk of continuing this. There's no need to continue this. The BOE clearly has made their findings. This is just a proof of concept, as we heard from Mr. Kretz, and the bigger plans will obviously need to come to the council for more permits. Overall, the construction, I feel, and based on the report, is non-intrusive. The tunneling won't create noise, movement that can be felt in surface level, or environmental impacts. So let's start digging, clearly. And let's beat the East Coast to this. I know he's proposed also a Hyperloop on the East Coast, and talking to my colleagues on National League of Cities are excited about that effort on our colleagues on the East Coast cities. But I just say no delays. Let's dig.
Mr. Rue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And and I share the enthusiasm of both the chairman and Councilman Buscaino, and I am very, very excited about this project. I mean, as Councilman Kretz stated, this is world class, and sharing the other side of the 405 freeway, this could be revolutionary for traffic congestion, and not just for traffic, but also for the environment. And but I do have a couple of questions and a couple of concerns. Our chairman asked most of them, but one of the questions I have is, the boring company as well as the city, I believe in the briefings that I had with both of you guys, have come out and said outright that there are some pieces inherent to this project that requires mitigation. No?
No, if there were no mitigation measures in the initial study, found no potential significant impacts. If mitigation measures were required, then it would have been a mitigated negative declaration.
Right, so that's what I was. So there's no mitigations required for the entire tunneling of this project?
For this pilot concept, the 2.7 miles, correct.
Okay, and I know the chairman also alluded to this earlier, but and you said you're going to have a clause for Metro. But at the same time, I just want to get clarification, because the letter we received from Metro is that, and also according to the PUC, the boring company would need to receive a permit for Metro. Is that correct?
So we agree with them, but in that language it says for a public transit operation. We don't see this pilot concept as a public transit operation, but still, in being one, careful, and two, just practical, we want to coordinate with Metro. So we will still, even though this may or may not require their approval under the state code, we plan to make sure it's not going to impact their planned project in the area in the future, and we do plan to coordinate with them.
So I guess Metro is classifying this as a public transit project, while the boring company and BOE is classifying this as just a tunnel.
Yeah, because no public will be allowed in the tunnel other than, maybe some of us may go as a tour or something like that, but there will be no transit operation. There's not even an exit at the other end in this project. It's really to test, the cars that they may use and things like that privately. So we don't see it as a public transit project at this point. We just see it as a tunnel project that the city is issuing. But still, it's a significant structure, and we don't want it to be in the way of Metro in the future, so we will coordinate with them.
Okay, and I know the project, the Hyperloop and the project in East Coast is going through multiple jurisdictions, and I know the boring company is trying to get the approval from all the different jurisdictions. I mean, while I am very excited about this, I know the chairman might get some more approvals. I mean, there are other folks in the city that is concerned, and I would like to get Metro's buy-in as well, not just checking on the, as the chairman said,
Whether it's in the way of their...
yeah, whether it's in the way of any other current or future projects, but also if we could clarify this Public Utilities Code section 130252A.
Right. I think it's important to note, too, that they have been in some of our meetings, as they acknowledge in their letter, which they submitted to the council file, and so we definitely plan to continue coordinating with them.
Okay. Well, that's it.
Any additional questions or comments or concerns? Okay. As I said, I'm torn on this, and to a certain extent, not because I don't love this project. I love this project. It's the CEQA stuff that concerns me. But I'm gonna recommend that we approve the motion with a couple of amendments. I guess unless, is there anything the city attorney wants to add to this discussion?
No, we've given our advice already.
Okay. First is a technical amendment to the first moving clause to modify one word to read, and I was asked to do this, a notice of exemption, change it to was filed by the Bureau of Engineering on March 28th rather than was prepared. That was a request by the Bureau of Engineering to make that change. I think it's innocuous. Second is what we discussed, the additional recommendation that Metro review and approval be required as a condition of the permit issuance to ensure that there is no conflict with future projects. And then third is additional recommendations that the permit conditions indemnify the city, which I know you mentioned, thought that was planning to happen, but I want to make sure that it indemnifies it both for the hard costs of the tunnel, but also for legal costs. Sure. Are there any concerns with those three amendments?
Can we somehow ask for the clarification on the Public Utilities Code section 130252-A that was brought up by Metro and Councilmember Bonin?
So explain what you want as far as an amendment.
Well, the statute states that I guess the question is this considered a public public mass transit system or project?
I think if I understand the Second Amendment, though, it would...
If it's a public mass transit system, then we cannot do a CEQA exemption. So they're mutually exclusive. If the moment we were to make that point, then we cannot grant a CEQA exemption. The only way we can grant this CEQA exemption is if we accept the premise that BOE is giving us, which is that it is a proof of concept, basically excavation tunnel, and it is not, and we have to be very clear about what we're approving is not a public transit system.
Right.
And maybe we can state that out clearly to the record as well, that we are not approving a transit system. We are not approving a significant project in that regard. We are merely approving a proof of concept hole in the ground that would be with these additional amendments. Does that answer the question, or is there something further on that? I'm open to ideas if you want to narrow
I
down.
was just going to add also that what is one of our proposed conditions, the revocable permit, that it's not to be used by the public, and so, I mean, there definitely won't be any public mass transit in the tunnel.
I mean, we can make that an additional amendment to this just to make it even more clear. Sure. That we're approving the motion, and the fourth amendment would be that the tunnel we approve, is not to be used for public transit in any way under this permit.
Right. And again, maybe if I can, Mr. Chair, to ease some of your concerns, Mr. Rue, this is no different than what's happening in the city of Hawthorne right now, correct?
Correct.
Okay, same thing. Proof of concept, had an opportunity to visit, pretty amazing. So just, I mean, hopefully that ease some of the concerns.
The indemnification process, including all attorney's fees, I mean, as long as we're airtight on that and the city attorney agrees with that,
the sad reality is that Hawthorne and other cities will do things and not get sued, and we will do anything, we'll drop this pen and we're going to get sued. And, clearly, but that is what it is. So, Mr. Herman, no more comments. Mr. Herman, if you speak out again, I'm going to have the sergeants have you removed. final warning. So with that, I'm still hearing the goat sounds. So Sergeant, if you could make sure he is escorted off the premises.
So, Mr. Chair, I'll approve as amended.
Okay. So approved as amended without objection with the four amendments listed. And Mr. Espinosa, do you have those four amendments clearly? Great. Then it is so ordered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next we have item 5.
I have to say I'll make the motion.
Oh, okay. Mr. Espinosa, would you read item 5 into the record, and then we'll get Mr. Kretz up because I know he's on a tight time schedule.
Item number 5 is a motion from Councilmember Kretz and Blumenfield relative to entering into an agreement with the West Side Coalition and or issue the necessary permits to establish the Enhanced Pathway Analytics Program.
Okay, and on this one, we'll start out, Mr. Kretz, we can have public comment or we can start out with you. I know you're on a timeline. You want to start? Okay, go ahead. And if folks who are leaving the room could do so quietly, we still have other items to go through, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to go first, since I have a 2 o'clock Committee of Personnel and Animal Welfare to chair, so I greatly appreciate it. And colleagues, I want to thank you first and foremost for holding this hearing today. As you may know, this is my 3rd motion attempting to move this program forward, but it just points out my dedication to this great program, the Enhanced Pathway Analytics Program, which we call EPAP for short. For 5 years, I've been working with community leaders in my district to install a cutting-edge, unique technology that could revolutionize the way we study traffic patterns and fight crime. And that system and that technology is the EPAP. It's a very simple program with the potential to affect tremendous benefits. At its core, it uses video and license plate reading technologies and cameras to analyze traffic patterns in ways that we haven't been able to do before. This will be the first system of its kind. Additionally, the system will provide LAPD and other law enforcement agencies with access to vital information to aid with its investigations and prosecutions of crimes. And perhaps best of all, the nonprofit community group proposing the system, the West Side Coalition, will build out and maintain it at no cost to the city. This is a tremendous opportunity that we shouldn't pass up. Some of the questions I explored as I learned about EPAP are probably the same questions that you'll have, so let me address a few of them. First, the system has extensive protections built in to protect individuals' privacy. No personally identifiable information will be generated by the system, with the exception of the video, which will be exclusively available to law enforcement only. Second, the system only creates aggregate data. It won't even store license plates. The proprietary software the West Side Coalition will develop will ensure that only aggregate, non-personally identifiable data is created. Third, the West Side Coalition will fully indemnify the city, removing any legal liability. Fourth, the coalition will be responsible not only for installation of the system, but for maintenance, so there aren't any hidden costs to the city down the road. And fifth, the system only will be installed in communities that want it. You may be wondering why the EPAP is before your committee today. The answer is that in order for the system to be built out, it needs to use city light poles for the cameras. And as you know, the Bureau of Street Lighting has a simple application process for installing telecommunications and other equipment on its poles. The Bureau has clear guidelines as to what it is and what isn't allowed on its poles. However, in those guidelines, cameras are never mentioned. And unfortunately, to date, the West Side Coalition has been denied the right to use city light poles, despite there being no rule against doing so, and despite my request that they be allowed to use the standard city permitting process, just like AT&T and Verizon and Spectrum and all other companies whose equipment can be found on poles all over our city. Unfortunately, BSL continues to deny the West Side Coalition permits, so in order to move this process forward, my motion asks the council to direct the Bureau to process EPAP permit applications just like any other similar application. Over the years, I've heard a few arguments as to why the city shouldn't move forward with the program. However, I haven't been convinced by any of these arguments. The question has been raised as to whether it's legal and whether there's any liability with allowing a nonprofit to install cameras on city property. With everything I've read and been presented, I haven't seen any reason not to move this program forward. And the community leaders and homeowners associations advocating for this system represent thousands and thousands of residents in my district, and they have a track record of giving back to the city and its institutions. And every year, the West Side Coalition's sister organization, Friends of West LA, gives $350,000 to our city's schools, parks, libraries, and LAPD and LAFD stations with no strings attached. These community members and neighborhood organizations have shown a tremendous commitment to our city. When it comes down to it, deciding whether or not to allow private cameras on city poles is a council decision, and it's a policy decision. Will or won't the city allow cameras on its poles? That's a question we're asking, and more importantly, the city council is empowered to answer that question. And while I greatly respect the Bureau and its staff, and the city attorney and his very talented staff, their job is to implement the policy decisions the council makes and to give us legal advice. Their role is not to make the policy. And so I believe this question is within the purview of the council. It's important to me, important to thousands of members of my district. I believe if we approve this motion, we'll look back in 5 years and see the amazing results and wonder why this was even a controversial topic to begin with. I greatly appreciate your support on this item, and I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kretz. I'm sure we have questions, but I know you're running to the meeting. I guess we'll go to our public commenters, and then we'll talk with the staff if you want to be here for that. So we'll hear from Aaron Green, then Tina Vartanian, and then I have 3 others as well.
Mr. Chair, honorable council members, my name is Aaron Green. I'm the president of the AFRIA Consulting Group. My firm represents the West Side Coalition along with its sister group, Friends of West LA. Mr. Chair, I know I've only got 1 minute. If perhaps I could have one more, but I will understand if not. This is a very detailed program. Mr. Kretz spoke clearly about it. I want to thank Mr. Kretz. My clients want to thank Mr. Kretz for his tireless dedication to this. At its core, when I was approached by the West Side Coalition 5 years ago to work on this, I looked at the code, I looked at the state law, and I said, this is a simple process. I'm going to be working on this for 2 to 3 months. My firm has been in business since 1985. We represent mostly developers, for-profit institutions, but I've come to know these community leaders as a result of my work, and I felt that this was a simple program and one that we should pursue. I had no idea that we would be here 5 years later with something that seemed so straightforward, that there are no prohibitions against in the law or in the city code. I am here to answer questions. There are members of my client's association that are here. I do hope that you approve this, and thank you for the extended time.
Thank you. Now, I cannot give you an extra minute, but we do have, when we get to questions, we will probably ask you some questions, in which case we'll bring you back up to answer those questions.
Yes, sir.
Next, Tina Vartanian, followed by Allison Saunders.
My name's Tina Vartanian. I'll be reading into the record a letter from Marilyn Tusher, president of the Westwood Garden Civic Association. She was unable to be here but asked for me to read her letter. I am writing to you as president of the Westwood Garden Civic Association, representing over 600 single-family homes on the west side of Los Angeles. We have been in existence for over 70 years, continually working with the city and others to preserve and protect our quality of life and the peaceful enjoyment of our home and neighborhood. I myself have lived here for over 50 years, serving on this board for many years. Our boundaries extend from National Boulevard to 10 Freeway to Pico Boulevard and Overland to Midvale on the west. For at least the last 4 years, we have been working to have the West Side Coalition's EPAP program implemented in our community. We gratefully thank our council member Paul Kretz for his continued support of our community and putting forth this item on the agenda along with council member Blumenfield. Cameras on light poles are already a way of everyday life at many city locations. This motion before you will not cost the city any money, as it will be funded separately. Can I also enter this into the record?
Yes. Give it to clerk. Thank you. Next, Allison Saunders, followed by Lisa Waltz.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you for hearing our plea today, and thank you for Councilmember Kretz for his support. I'm Allison Saunders. I'm the president of the California Country Club Homes Association in the Cheviot Hills area. We are, a lot of the stuff you're going to hear and that I would say in my short time is going to be repeated. So I think I'm just going to cut a little bit to the chase in terms of why this is so important and why we've been working on this so feverishly for the last number of years. We are right off the 10 freeway. We are easy on, easy off. We are both a cut-through neighborhood and we are a crime neighborhood in terms of burglaries, thefts from front porches and the like. We have local, homeowners videos that show cars cruising, gangs getting out, running up, grabbing things, casing houses, and jumping back in cars and taking off. We can see them on our home personal videos. We'd like to have this system implemented. It's no cost to the city. It's something that's all over the city in terms of private buildings and private institutions. And again, all the information is encrypted, and it would be a huge tool for both law enforcement and traffic analytics. Thank you.
Next, Lisa Waltz, followed by Terry Tippett.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Waltz Morocco. I'm a member of the Westside Neighborhood Council. I'm also a commissioner on the West LA APC, and I am president of the Overland Avenue community. Today I'm speaking on behalf of my community and my neighborhood. EPAP is so important to our community, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to hear our testimony today, and I'd also like to thank Councilman Kretz for his unwavering support that got us to this hearing today. The council and the commission that I sit on, I can tell you something that you probably already know, that the people that come before us are concerned about three things: crime, traffic, and infrastructure. And if anyone could solve those problems, I guess they would name a sandwich after you or something. But most of the time, these things are so hard to solve because, or even put a Band-Aid on, because there's a lack of interest, personnel, or even money to do them. In this case, the Westside Coalition is willing and able to execute EPAP. In this case, they have the funds to do it. So the city will have this enhancement at no cost. As the councilman said, this seems like a no-brainer. I just want to say quickly on a personal note, I live on Overland Avenue.
That's your time. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Terry Tippett. And it's not personal. I have to do that for everybody.
And she has to do it, too, at her APC, so she knows. I'm Terry Tippett. I am chair of the Westside Neighborhood Council. For 23 years, I served on the Westwood Design Review Board, 18 of which I was chair. But today I speak on behalf of my other hat. I'm president of the Westwood HOA, representing 1,200 household members. I've lived in my home 44 years. I am actively involved in my community for the last 30 years. I'm not going to repeat what has been said. This is an important project. We do need it. As you saw today on TV in the last few days, Waves has now worked that people are cutting through. This will distinguish between cut-through and residential. This also is a problem for us because since Expo went up and running, of which is we have 2 stations within our community, we have seen more increase in traffic because it's at grade, which we, of course, didn't want, and it's blocking traffic. This will help us ease traffic and get people around us and where they need to go, and it is at no cost to the city.
Thank you. I think that's it for the speaker cards. So we don't have a department speaker. I may ask the city attorney to say a few words on this. As I understand the tricky issue here, it's not so much with the cameras as it is with the license plate reader. And that's where some of our legal issues come into play, and who owns the camera and that kind of thing. If it was just a donation of cameras onto our light poles for the police, it would be a no-brainer at the moment. But it gets more complicated. Not that it's impossible, but we have the city attorney's office to speak.
Thank you, Council Member. We've looked at this issue extensively for the past 5 years, along with the Council Member. What we've concluded under current law is that we are preempted from using these cameras for the purpose of traffic studies. In 2015, the state passed a series of very stringent privacy laws regarding the use of license plate reading technology. They're very extensive to protect people's privacy so there's no misuse of that information. In fact, the information that you were provided by Mr. Green provides you with the preamble for that legislation, where they talked about the CHP and under the vehicle code that they have the ability to use the license plate reading technology only for the purposes of looking for stolen vehicles. At the time the legislature passed the stringent privacy regulations in the civil code regarding the use of the license plate reading technology, they did not amend the vehicle code. They did not amend it to allow for to be used for traffic studies. Under the current law, under 627 of the vehicle code, it lists the criteria that can be used for traffic studies. License plate reading technology is not one of those criteria. Therefore, if the city wanted to use that, or if they wanted to go forward with trying to use that, then the first step should be getting the state legislature to amend the vehicle code to allow for the use of that technology for traffic studies. Right now, DOT could not accept any information obtained from those cameras. DOT does not use license plate reading technology because they can't, under state law, use that technology. There was some false information being put out that they had conducted a traffic study, that the department had used that technology. That is incorrect. The department did it manually. They take the last 3 digits manually of a license plate, and then they determine whether that particular vehicle, they identify the vehicle using that manual information, which is not connected to any computer system and cannot obtain people's personal information, just to determine whether that vehicle is moving in and out of the district or whether they live within that section. That is currently how you can calculate that. If you look at, under the law, under the privacy laws, under the civil code, the city cannot use or cannot sell, transfer, or share a license plate reading technology with anyone but another government agency. The city cannot, since the city is preempted from using that technology under the vehicle code, we can't contract with a private entity to do what we cannot do ourselves. Also, we don't control that information. We don't store that information. That's being stored by the coalition or by the group they've hired to do that. That information could be subject to manipulation. In the original motion several years ago, the information was they wanted to use the cameras to provide to LAPD for criminal investigations. To pay for that, they were going to sell the information to developers. Now, you've heard at no cost, but who is ultimately the end user of this information, since it can't be the Department of Transportation? Those are questions you need to ask. Who's actually paying for this? Cameras, who's paying for the cameras? And how is that money, who's ultimately the end user? Because you do need to know under the new civil code sections. In fact, if the city were to accept that information for other purposes, there are a number of stringent requirements that we would be under. First, we would have to develop a plan and disclose to the public how the information was going to be used. It'd have to be it'd have to be an extensive program or an extensive explanation of how the information is used. Then we would have to monitor carefully that information, which we don't have control over, to determine that there haven't been any breaches. If there's a breach of that information, all we have to do is look at Facebook. If there is a breach of that information, if somebody was able to get a hold of that and was able to obtain financial information, or to use the information to racially profile who's coming into their neighborhoods, the city then could be reached if we've used that information. The penalties are extraordinary in these laws. They wanted to stop and prevent the use of to protect privacy. It's $2,500 per violation, and including all civil criminal penalties as well, and any other attorney's fees. And in fact, if more than 500 people's information has been violated, we have to then turn the information over to the Attorney General of the state of California. We have to notify everybody whose information was misused. This is a new area of law. It hasn't been dealt with at the state legislature in terms of traffic studies. Therefore, our office is not recommending that this motion pass. And unless you have any further questions, I'm happy to answer.
Well, I do have a couple questions regarding this. So you're saying we're preempted from using license plate reader information specifically?
As defined in that motion.
We're talking about the license plate reader, not just the general idea of a camera.
Well, under the definition, it's a very broad definition in the Civil Code regarding what license plate reading technology is. It's the use of any cameras where that information then can be transmitted to a storage system, a computer storage system. So it would fall under. So we have to be very careful. It's a very broad definition.
And what are the liabilities? So if it's a private entity can use this information, right?
They can use it certainly on their private property without us being involved at all. There are civil code penalties or civil code sections regarding that, but our office wouldn't be involved in that since it would be on private property.
But the link for us, even though all we're doing technically is providing space on a light pole, you're saying that we are going to be held liable. So if you could explain, why is the liability greater for us with this kind of camera than it is, let's say, with AT&T or Verizon, when there's a lot of information you can get from their signals?
AT&T is a public utility regulated by the Public Utilities Commission. They authorize the utilities to be able to use. Ted can really speak to
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So as Mike was saying, they are a public utility for telecommunications purposes, and as such, they, of course, generate a lot of data. Moreover, they're specifically, expressly authorized to be located in the public right-of-way. And not only that, we cannot prohibit them from operating by denying them the right to be in the public right-of-way. The last connection is with the city streetlights. Previous council actions have expressly authorized the Bureau of Street Lighting to allow the telecommunications attachments onto the city streetlight poles for one very good reason, because they're going to be in the public right-of-way anyway. So it's a way to allow the telecommunications facilities to co-locate on the city streetlight poles in lieu of building their own antenna, in some cases, right next to the streetlight pole.
Right, so that was Mr. Kretz had asked that question about why is it different than AT&T or Spectrum, and I wanted to just be clear about what the differences are, is that those are specifically called out in the public utilities, and they have that right to be there, and a private entity wouldn't. So we would have the financial, what I'm hearing you say, and I want to just be clear about it, you're saying that the financial liability of the breach of privacy would, even though it's a private entity that is covering this, would fall to the city? And
if
why
we
is that?
use the information, yes, I think it would fall to the city because we're using the information, which is...
What if we didn't use the information? What if we just leased out the space and they were filming?
But what the concern is still that they're on the city's equipment, so we're inextricably intertwined with them in this partnership, where in the end their wrongful act is imputed to the
just
city.
trying to clarify. So even if we didn't use the information, the fact that we have licensed essentially or leased that space makes us liable.
If we have reason to believe that the information was going to be used in a way that can't be used under state law, then I think a court could possibly find that we would be held liable.
I'm not clear about. I mean, maybe part of this is I want to understand our liabilities, and maybe that's part of where we're going to move with this, is to get back a report on what our actual liabilities are, because that's one of the big questions for me, and because generally I like the idea of being able to get more information. More information is good, especially if that information is going to the police. But the question is, what else is it used for? And
based on the fact that the public agency does have to disclose to the public how...
Could pull the mic up a little. if you
Oh, yes. How the information is being used. For instance, if license plate reading technology is being used on our street equipment, I do believe the city would have to disclose to the public. We would have to follow the civil code in terms of notifying the public the requirements that are listed. They're pretty numerous that we would have to provide public notice to.
Additional question of the colleague.
I mean, the private entity right now under these sections.
If I'm not mistaken, I'm just trying to recollect, wasn't even the red light cameras, weren't they no longer utilized because of the issues concerning license plate reading technology?
I believe that was part of it.
I mean, there's precedent here, I think, with some of the problems with this, with utilization of
Right.
this.
I mean, license plate readers are used, red light cameras, just not in the city of LA at the current. I mean,
right.
Unfortunately, I know this because I got a ticket. But
and those are a law enforcement use. So
right.
that's a situation where
that's a speed of traffic violation, not a.
So they are allowed. They are explicitly allowed for law enforcement.
Yeah, they've under peace officers and CHP.
Mr. Root, you had a question?
Thank you. And since the city attorney's up here, so you commented a lot on the license plate technology being used for traffic, but what about specifically for crime? I know as the chairman stated, if the cameras were donated to the city and LAPD used it, then obviously we can.
There are issues involving that, and I don't want to talk about those in open session because it is subject of litigation right now. If we want to get into that issue, I would recommend that you put the item over and notice it for a closed session. The city is a party in the litigation.
Okay. But there are issues.
There are issues.
And that was what I thought. Also, who owns the data? It's the private company, right?
Yes.
So we don't own the data.
No.
So when that data is transferred over from the coalition to the city, does it become publicly available now, like subject to PRA?
Yes.
So that would also pose a privacy issue then,
yes,
right?
It would.
Okay, and this is actually Mr. Chairman, I have questions for DOT as well as DOT and the coalition. Can I ask DOT questions? DOT here?
Do we have a rep from DOT?
Yes.
Yeah. So my question to DOT is, if the data, whether it's aggregated or if the data from the coalition is transferred to the city, does DOT can DOT use this information in real time to analyze traffic patterns?
Jennifer Cohen, Director of Government Affairs for DOT. I believe that we cannot because we cannot validate it.
Okay.
We would have to validate it before we could use it.
Right. Okay.
You can't validate it, and what the city attorney is saying is that you can't legally even accept it. Is that correct? Or the city attorney?
I defer to the city attorney
Right.
on that.
But if your question is if you could somehow get it, then could it be useful?
Right. And the previous question I asked was, even if we did accept it, then it becomes public information, and that poses a whole different case of legal ramifications, because whatever comes to the city is PRA-able, right? Another question for DOT, or I don't know if it's Public Works. Is there a permit fee for use of the poles? Do we charge public utilities or anybody else?
I can answer that question.
Okay.
We do have a representative from Bureau of Street Lighting.
Sure.
Yes. Short answer is yes. So the telecommunication companies that currently have co-located facilities on streetlights do pay an annual fee to the city. The annual fee is calculated by the Bureau of Street Lighting to basically fully account for the city's costs associated with having that equipment on there, including the reduction of lifetime of the pole for having equipment on there and the power that the equipment draws, because it draws its power from the streetlight circuit, and the Bureau of Street Lighting pays that power bill to the Department of Water and Power. So all of those costs are bundled together, and I believe the cost is something on the order of $780 or so per pole per year.
Right, I'm told it's $787 per year.
That sounds like a more accurate number.
So in this case, and I have a couple of questions for the coalition.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, or is this is the coalition asking for an? I'm told they're asking for an exemption of that fee.
Mr. Green, you can come forward. Go ahead.
Aaron Green, on behalf of the West Side Coalition. We are not asking for an exemption to the cost of the permits.
Okay, so you will pay for the permitting. The pole costs and permitting costs and all of that.
We are proposing to use the exact same process that's been in existence for a number of years. It's a straight 4-page application and the whole kit caboodle.
Hold the mic up.
And similarly, as any requirement for anybody who's putting infrastructure on city light poles with regard to indemnification and things like that, the coalition will fully indemnify the city.
Can I follow up on that question?
Sure. And
it's your time.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, Mr. Chair.
When you say fully indemnify, I understand what that means in terms of the camera falling on somebody's head, that kind of those physical things. But does that how do you indemnify for the breach of privacy, $2,500 a pop or $25,000 a pop? I forget what you said, but where it could be, you could be into the many millions of dollars.
Certainly. So I would step back for just a moment and say if that is, we have a fundamental disagreement with the city attorney on how the law reads, and ultimately that's going to be a decision for this body. The way that the city attorney is interpreting the law, and I have great respect for the city attorney and the work that they've done, and they've been very thoughtful about working with us and sharing some information over the last number of years. They're referring to Senate Bill 34 and the changes to the civil code that were enacted. The changes to the civil code that were enacted, and I'm happy to read some of them, they're included in the letter that I submitted yesterday, reference when a government agency owns or licenses computer data. And the underlying supposition that the city attorney is using, as I understand the argument that they made, is that simply because a license plate reading camera is placed on a city pole, that would then extend to the definition of the city owning or licensing license plate reading cameras and data. We do not agree that simply by placing a camera on the pole, the city then owns it and licenses it. I think that fundamental misunderstanding or disagreement is what underpins this whole thing. Because if the city is not the owner or the licensor of these cameras, then the extended concerns that Mr. Nagel expressed no longer apply because the cameras are the West Side Coalition's, they are not the city's. And so therefore the city would not be subject to those fines and things like that. I think, Mr. Blumenfield, directly to your question, if we could come up with some sort of, and I don't know, and I would want to refrain from spitballing here at the podium, but if there was a question of whether or not the city would be subject to some of those penalties, and that was up in question, and somebody did decide to bring penalties against the city, we could put in our indemnification policy some measure of financial protection and even a clause that if we're wrong and the city attorney's interpretation is right, we would take down the cameras. We do not intend to ask the city to break the law. That's not our intent. And if we're wrong, or if the law specifically prohibits this, then this system should not go up. But we've read the law. There's nothing explicitly stating that we cannot do what we would like to do. There are, for instance, in the vehicle code, I think city attorney, and again, respectfully disagree, cited that only law enforcement can utilize these cameras in certain instances or in instances. But the vehicle code doesn't say that. It specifically provides guidelines for how law enforcement, specifically the CHP, would operate these cameras. But if cameras couldn't be owned or operated by municipalities or private agencies, then you wouldn't have license plate reading cameras at LAX today, which you do. If cameras couldn't be owned or operated by private agencies, which is the extrapolation of Mr. Nagel's theory, I'm sorry? You can't go to the bank and you can't have...
In fairness, what I hear them saying, and the city attorney can speak for themselves,
please,
was that it's not that they can't be owned or operated, it's that when they're used in the public right-of-way, then we therefore, because of that fact, we then take on that extra liability that because we've licensed it essentially in our public right-of-way, that then we then bear that extra liability. City attorney want to weigh in? Am I reading your? And you could stay close. I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but it's a very important point to understand. And out of this, Mr. Nagel, you want to elaborate on that a little bit? But it seems to be kind of the nub of the issue is whether or not, or how the city gets this extra liability, and if there is a way to indemnify the city, although it's a hard one.
Well, first of all, we are preempted under the vehicle code for using it for traffic studies. The vehicle code under section 21 states that where the legislature has weighed in on the issue statewide, which they have, we can't enact laws that contradict or are different from what's in there. So they've only allowed it, and we've been through this.
Right, so we can't use it for traffic studies, but that's not what
Well, now
is being argued.
we're back to using it for peace officers, but my understanding is LAPD will not accept the information for the same reasons that DOT will not, because we can't verify, because we don't control the information. But in terms of the vehicle code, no, we simply can't use it. So if we were permitting the use of our street poles to a company that is going to use information that we can't use, then what is the purpose? I mean, the city can't use it. So who is going to be using that information and for what purpose?
So to help me understand this, if I can, thank you, Mr. Chair. Say if the camera is purchased by the coalition, say through the LA Police Foundation, okay, a nonprofit, contributions made, they put the camera up, and the data then is directly tied. You put the camera up, the camera is placed on a street pole, and if the data is then tied directly to the LAPD, would that be kosher?
We have, I believe, some cameras that LAPD uses, yes.
So is the coalition willing to compromise and work directly, so have it directly linked to the LAPD database? Can the coalition at least agree to?
I think they would agree to do that, but they also want the data for their own purpose.
Traffic,
but Mr. Green, if you want to
respond to that. It looks like you can't have both. So can we compromise and get something?
And if I may interrupt, I think oftentimes when we've had situations, because I've been involved in some in my years here at the city, where there's a camera through the police foundation, it's tied into the police, those are surveillance cameras. Although while the definition of an ALPR, the automatic license plate reading, can be very broad, they're not necessarily, they're simply surveillance cameras. This is specifically about something that is intended to be automatic license plate reading. So it does, kick in, just like as if, right now the police department already uses ALPR for law enforcement reasons, and it's creating all sorts of legal issues involving, including litigation that Mike has alluded to. So I just want to clarify, when we start talking about, well, can we have a camera tying feed into the police department? This is something that's more than just a camera. It's ALPR, which triggers some unique requirements.
And there are issues, as I said, we are in litigation in matters following Los Angeles
but
Police
I think
Department.
we should let him answer, but
right.
Just want to clarify that.
We want to be careful if we are going to get into issues about how LAPD uses the cameras, then that should be a closed session item and the matter should be put over.
Okay.
I think the sense here, Mr. Chair, is it's a crime prevention tool. Aside from the traffic data information, which I struggle with myself, even as a former police officer, I don't know what you're going to do with the traffic data, but putting on my senior lead officer hat and working with the coalition, I see you all as a neighborhood watch group, even more so, doing what's best and protect the quality of life there and do everything you can to prevent crime in the first place. So I applaud your efforts here. In fact, there's the Community Police Advisory Board in San Pedro and Wilmington are asking me to help fund license plate readers, and that's going to hopefully come out in the budget tomorrow, and work alongside the port and the port police. So appreciate the effort here. But listen, the Palos Verdes Peninsula cities installed 44 license plate reading cameras. It's a neighboring city. Last time I checked, we're still in the state of California, and they're allowed to work with the LA County Sheriff's Department with the installation of these cameras. It's been very effective.
But this is, I don't know that anybody's arguing about putting in, we're certainly allowed as a city to put in license plate readers.
So why can't Mr. Kretz fund these cameras out of his office budget and be
Mr. Chair?
No, he could, and in fact, if the coalition were willing to just donate the money to give the city the cameras, we could use those cameras for law enforcement
in that specific area.
But they're not. I don't think that's what they're proposing. But let Mr. Green answer that question.
Sure.
Is this on the table of just giving the city the cameras to put up to use for law enforcement purposes and not using the data to sell or to make money off of?
A couple of there are a number of questions there. Let me unpack it a little bit. We first proposed, when we brought this system forward, a direct partnership with LAPD and running the data through their system. at that time, when we met with LAPD, we had several meetings with their IT department. The request of the department was specifically not to run the data through their system for the reason that Mr. Rue cited, which it becomes, if you run the data through LAPD system, the raw data becomes a public record. The department did not want to subject itself or create an opportunity to have every single piece of data become PRA-able and result in an instance where there might be endless PRAs. The way that this system would work is when the department, any department, would want to query the system, either for video data, which would be used for law enforcement only, then only that specific file, that specific document would become a public record. So it would not create the same problem that Mr. Buscaino's proposal, which again was part of our initial proposal, would necessitate. I think as it comes to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
As it comes to whether or not the system, we would simply give the city the money to put up the system. We thought about this early on. And with due respect to my friends at the city, oftentimes when money gets provided to put up a system, it does not get maintained. And so I remember when I met with one department when we first started having this conversation.
Although if that were the only issue, there was a lot of workarounds on that. In the sense that we could put money into a fund that does the maintenance, and I mean, if we can get down to that being the issue, then we're in business.
Well,
go ahead.
It is not the only issue. The other issue is that, quite frankly, the members of this community would also like to better understand traffic in their communities. That's why the aggregate traffic data is something that we've requested.
Doesn't DOT do traffic surveys? Don't they do traffic surveys?
They do, but as the city attorney has told us, they're prohibited by law from using these license plate readers for traffic studies. That's what the city attorney. Now,
but if their interest is looking at what the Department of Transportation is doing for traffic studies to understand the traffic patterns of the area, they could probably work with DOT on that without this technology.
Well, DOT doesn't, I mean, I would let DOT speak for themselves. I don't believe that there's an ability to do traffic counts at 110 intersections and pathway analytics the way that this system would provide.
And then, Mr. Rudy, did you have a question? Then I think we're going to, I don't think, just members, I don't think we're going to solve this today. Right. So I'm going to, after your question, I think I'm going to continue this with a couple of directions for additional information so that we can. But yes, absolutely.
Could DOT answer that?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I think that DOT can do traffic studies at a variety of locations as directed. I don't think that we're in conflict. I think that it's a totally different mechanism. We do them manually.
But at the same time, they do lack resources to do it everywhere if everyone asks for it. But let me clean this up. I just have 3 questions. I might just clean it up. Let me ask City Attorney. So, had these cameras be donated to the City of LA, could these cameras be used, or license plate technology be used on city property owned by the city for crime and/or traffic?
For criminal investigations, for traffic.
Not for traffic.
Not allowed under the vehicle code currently. For
So,
the reasons I've already stated.
So, for as you stated before, so we could use it for crime, but we can't use it for traffic. And in order for us to use it for traffic, the first step would be to change state law.
Yes.
And so for the coalition, have you partially answered the question about would the coalition be willing to donate these cameras for at least crime purposes? Is that a consideration that you guys would do? The coalition.
We would want the system to exist as a whole. So parsing it half for traffic or half for crime and half for something else kind of...
but unfortunately, based on current law, we have to parse into 2 separate. But would the coalition be willing to donate these cameras to the city or money to purchase cameras?
If I could, and I apologize, we have not seen, and I would appreciate if the city attorney would provide the exact legal code section that explicitly states that it cannot be done.
Okay. So, last question. Has the coalition considered putting these cameras on private property?
We have, and I appreciate you asking that question. So, we looked at installing these on private property. The issue with that is that because of the major number of cameras that we'd like to install, over 100. That would require negotiating 100 private party leases. For a nonprofit that has no staff, the only person that's really getting paid for this is me at cost recovery and some technicians. So we don't have the ability to negotiate 100 plus private party leases.
Okay. So I know, well.
Any additional questions? I don't think we have enough to move this item forward yet, but there's still some questions out there. So what I'm going to recommend, colleagues, and I'm open to, is to continue this item, ask for a report back from the city attorney that we can agendize both for open session and closed session in terms of the legal liabilities. I would also ask, voluntarily for the West Side Coalition to come up with something regarding, their proposal for indemnification of the legal potential costs, because that is an issue that is outstanding that you may be able to work on, and we're certainly open to continuing this discussion further on, but it's clear that we need some additional information, and I think we need to hear from the city attorney both in open session and in closed session with a real report about the liabilities. Is there anything else that colleagues want to add?
Just a quick question, Mr. Green. Has the coalition identified a software company, license plate reader company already or not?
So the coalition will be writing the software. We will be subcontracting out to write the software ourselves. This will be proprietary software. As it relates to the cameras, I know we have identified a camera vendor. That camera vendor's changed over the last 5 years as technology has improved. So I can't tell you right off the top of my head which camera vendor we're using. They started this big, they're now this big.
In your report, it clearly indicates the software doesn't store license plate numbers. It receives a codified number in place of the license plate. So if we can, Mr. Chair, potentially we can get ITA to check on the legitimacy of
anonymized.
What they're saying,
right. I mean, I think that's the other big piece to this is what does anonymization mean? And I know that may be something we can't do in open session because there's
and
legal,
Mr. Chair,
but as part of our report backs for closed session as well, we can hear about the anonymization issue because that's also a critical piece to this.
And Mr. Chair, I would lastly say that if there are particular components that the city would recommend in order to facilitate something like that, our program is not set in stone, so we would be happy to try to accommodate those things to the best that we can if there's a pathway forward to doing so.
Okay, great. So without objection then, that'll be the order to continue the item with the ask for the report backs from the departments, the request for the West Side Coalition for their additional information. Thank you very much on that. And we will now move to something I should have done earlier, which is to ask that we take items 6 through 9 on consent. I mentioned earlier that we were going to do that, but we just haven't done it. Any objection to that? Seeing no objections, items 6, 7, 8, and 9 are approved on consent, and that takes us to item number 2, the street damage restoration. If you would read that into the record.
Item number 2. Our report is a budget recommendation and controller report relative to modifying the city's street damage restoration fee paid by the utility companies to fully recover the cost of street resurfacing and repairs needed to mitigate the impact of excavation.
Welcome. Oh, and do we have any public comment cards on this? No. No public comment cards on this item? So, there are cards on this item? Maybe we'll hear the cards and then we'll hear, we have 3 public comment cards on this. Mr. Noel Palais, come on forward, followed by John Johnston and Frank Lopez.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Noel Pele. I am with AT&T. I'm also joined by my colleague John Johnson, who will come and speak after I do. Basically, with regards to this report and the proposed ordinance that may or is being requested to possibly be moved
Put the
forward.
mic in front of you, sir.
Sorry.
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. With regards to this item, we are just requesting to have additional time to be able to work with the department on a standard for the fee structure that is beneficial for the city as a whole, and that takes the consideration to the impact of the members of the utility community as well. The report was recently released, and there are several specific provisions that merit additional discussion and clarification. Items such as 2B, 2C, 2E, 2F, and 2G before it is being moved forward for it to be codified. The plan as is currently presented may lead the ability of certain services from being delivered to all of the city's stakeholders. While we understand and we comprehend that this is just a step in the process, this is the first step and is intricate in order for us to be able to go ahead and move forward and put a valid proposal together. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, John Johnson.
Hello, I'm John Johnston with AT&T. In speaking specifically about some of the items that are proposed, we certainly understand that the street damage restoration fee has not been updated when it comes to the fees that are charged in a number of years. And we acknowledge and accept and agree with the city that those things should be brought up to standard. What we have some concerns with are some of the additive things that are wanted to do. One of which is instead of paying the street damage restoration fee on the width of our trench, which is how it is done today, they now want to add 5 feet on either side. So instead of paying street damage restoration fee on 1 foot, I'm now going to pay it on 11 feet, the length of my trench. That's a real big change in the methodology of calculating. Also, too, there's a provision here for the monies that are received for the street damage restoration fees to be put into a big pot as opposed to being reserved for that specific street. Thank you very much.
Thank you. AT&T. Next, we have Mr. Frank Lopez.
Good morning, council members. Frank Lopez from SoCal Gas. I'd like to ask that this item be continued just for one meeting. I know that the SDRF, they've hired a consultant to update the fee. The proposed changes just came out on Monday, and there are 10 documents that were uploaded to the council file that are technical in nature, over 100 pages of material, and the utilities that are subject to the fee haven't had an opportunity to review them and comment on them. And that's in contrast to the other way that we've operated with the bureaus and departments. For example, Bureau of Engineering, their asphalt standard, they put out a draft, we submitted comments, they fine-tuned and put it into place. And I think that's the process that we like to see. We're not opposed necessarily to any of the changes that have been put out there. We just want an opportunity to comment before this council takes action and makes a recommendation on something that's going to be a significant change to the fee structure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we'll have Street Services.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the council members, members of the Public Works Committee. Good afternoon. With me this afternoon, I have Kid Mosea, Assistant Director of the Bureau of Street Services, and also we have representatives from other city agencies that got deeply involved in this study. People from representatives from the General Services Department, and of course, representatives from our sister Bureau of Engineering. Before we discuss, the details of this report and the recommendations made, as part of this report, I would like, if you allow me, to give you a quick historical overview of the City Street Damage Restoration Fee Ordinance. I think it's important to know where we were, where we are, and where we want to be. So if you allow me 2 minutes, during the late 1980s and the early 1990s, and as a result of observations and routine inspections, the Bureau of Street Services determined that utility trenching had a severe impact on the life of street pavements. Consequently, and to validate our anecdotal information, the city of Los Angeles decided to study the noted damage of pavements, right? And decided to, at that time, hire Dr. Mohammed Shaheen to perform the study. Dr. Shaheen is a worldwide recognized engineer, scientist, and professor who has worked as a consultant for agencies such as the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, the Air Force, and of course, the city of Los Angeles. City agencies such as BOE, GSD, and BSS contributed to the study with their respective data to ensure that Dr. Shaheen was going to utilize the best and most accurate information available. During the summer of 1996, Dr. Shaheen presented his study titled Effects of utility cuts on pavements, right? Where he scientifically validated the significant impact of utility trenches on street pavements. The study was the foundation to creating a city ordinance, the city ordinance that we know today as the Street Damage Restoration Fee Ordinance, right? And the purpose of this ordinance, of course, is to regulate the excavation of city streets and to protect the city's investment on our street network. Your predecessors in 1998, council members, adopted this city ordinance and was approved for two primordial reasons. Number one, to create a fee for the excavation of city streets, and secondly, to incentivize the coordination between utility companies and city agencies to minimize those headaches that you get every once in a while when we pave a street and the day after a utility company comes and cut the street, right? So those were the two primary incentives for this ordinance. And I must say that since utility companies and city agencies work very, very well. By the way, the city of Los Angeles was the first big municipality that adopted a street damage restoration fee ordinance. After that, hundreds of municipalities in the nation have duplicated what we've done here in LA. In 2006, the fee structure was adjusted. The original fees were adopted in 1998, and in 2006 were adjusted. And since the city has not adjusted the fees. So it's been over 12 years that the city has not adjusted these fees. In 2014, our city controller released his findings of the city's pavement preservation program audit, and one of his recommendations, highly suggested the reassessment of the street damage restoration fees, because yes, he noted that we had not adjusted those fees since 2006. The city immediately decided to hire once again Dr. Shaheen, and with the assistance once again of the Bureau of Engineering, Street Services, and General Services, we came up with a report that was completed in May of 2017. And today we're asking you to consider the recommendations that we're making. Before I finish, I want to recognize and thank our city controller for his leadership, his vision, right, and for his full support to our recommendations. He strongly believes that the city needs to recuperate, the damage that our streets are suffering. Summarizing the recommendations that we're making would bring to the city of LA approximately no less than $100 million per year in new revenue. $100 million a year, that is the dollar amount of the damage that utility trenches create to our street system. So as a minimum, if we adopted the new fees, right, one of the recommendations that we're making, the minimum revenue that we could generate could be in the neighborhood of $100 million. So having said that, would you like us to go, council members, Mr. Chair, over the recommendations, or do you want to start the questions?
I think we can move to questions, colleagues, unless you guys want to go through them one by one. But question though you said we would get about $100 million. I see on the chart here is $114 million, but that's less than the 237. Is that actually full cost recovery? If we were to actually recover all the costs associated with these cuts, would it be more than that amount, or how much more? By what order of magnitude?
It would be significantly more, because the current fees and the fees adjusted in 2006 were only direct costs. What would cost to the city to repave or repair the streets? That is only direct costs. We never added the indirect costs. So if it is your desire to increase, or to add the indirect costs, we would work very closely with the CAO to determine what is the appropriate, indirect cost for this type of work.
And I'm not suggesting we do that today, but in terms of the proposal before us is not for that. It's just for what you've labeled as the functional effect only.
That is correct.
But if I understand you correctly, that's actually is not full cost recovery. Despite that sort of where the recommendation is toward full cost recovery, it's only a portion of the actual costs.
That is correct. Dr. Shaheen provided to you in his report three options, because there are two types of damage, to the street when we excavate the street. The functional damage refers to a street having a life expectancy of 25 years, and a result of the trenching, the street now will only last 8 or 10 years, right? And therefore, we need to resurface the street sooner. So the city is spending more money because we need to repair the street. That's the functional part. The other part that Dr. Shaheen analyzed is the structural, the real damage to the street, right? So there are two fees that we could charge, the structural and the functional. The third option is to add both and charge a fee that includes both functional and structural. But right now, our recommendation only highlights the functional side.
Ms. Rodriguez? Oh, I was told you had to go. I thought you had an urgent question before you had to leave. That's why.
No, unfortunately, I have to go to my next committee meeting, but I do know that this is something that the Bureau's been working on for quite a long time, and I know with the utilities, just in terms of the conversation and what was raised about SoCal Gas and when these documents, was there a lot of interaction working with the utilities in terms of what some of the solutions might be? In terms of alternatives, I know we talked about the medallions, and I wanted to get into some of those questions, but I hope for the purposes of this continued conversation that you're gonna engage in, I wanted to see if there was potentially some opportunities to collaborate with the utility companies, because the work that they do is really, it's a coordinated effort in terms of providing support services for the residents of the city of Los Angeles. What cooperative efforts we might engage in that could potentially be a huge cost savings both for the city and for the utility companies in terms of self-inspection, or I know there are certain companies that have been certified in other parts of the city for kind of inspection as it relates to the work that was conducted, just as that relates to BCA and some of the other ongoing costs, if that might be an opportunity for us to identify ways to collaborate. Just some of the questions that I had, and unfortunately I cannot say. I got to go to my next.
Certainly, Councilwoman, we can take all those great recommendations you're making and add them to our efforts to work with the numerous utility companies, over 100 utility companies. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So I understand the need to recover costs, and in fact, the rates have not been changed in quite a while. But however, I do have a couple of questions. What's the rationale of leaving a restoration fee on streets that were previously deemed past their useful life?
Well, in reality, the street is useful. We have streets in LA. We have determined in LA that streets, despite the fact that by formula you can say that a street is supposed to last so long. Let's say residential streets, technically they are designed to last between 20 and 25 years. In reality, we have streets in the valley that are in excellent condition, and they have lasted for over 40 years. So we want to make sure that the functional life of the street is not defined by an age, but instead by its condition. That is one of the recommendations we're making, to eliminate that age component of the fee. If the street is in good shape and it has 40 years, the street is being damaged by the utility cut.
I understood. And how does this impact the city-sponsored projects? For example, DWP's underground power lines, installing pipes for water, sanitation's installation of stormwater projects, how is this going to impact those projects?
It is my understanding, that is an excellent question, Councilwoman. It is my understanding that agencies such as DWP, they pay the fees as well. So contractors working for in city projects, they also have to get permits, pay the fees, and of course, meet all the guidelines that the Bureau of Engineering provides to them.
So the new rate structure will impact financially how these things are going to get done?
Again, city agencies that pay the fee would have to pay the adjusted fee as well.
So which brings me to my last question, Mr. Chair. So has DWP or sanitation analyzed the impacts of this proposal? And how does this specifically going to affect DWP ratepayers?
Well, again, once again, this is the first time we are presenting this to your committee. No, we had an effort, at departmental level, but this is the first step that we're taking. And by all means, I think it sounds like a great idea to sit down with all our sister agencies, not only sanitation and DWP. I mean, Rec and Parks, all the other agencies that may be impacted by this.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can make a recommendation before this moves forward to council, I'd like to recommend that that they look at that they provide their review of this before we vote on it in council. Okay. Well, I would like to ask DWP and sanitation to look at the structure and figure out what their impacts are going to be and review it. They haven't even seen it.
Well, yeah, they have not seen it.
They haven't provided input either.
They
haven't seen it. They haven't provided input. So all I'm asking is for them to provide their input before this goes to council.
That makes sense.
Thank you.
And toward that end, and there also, once were we to pass this and the council to pass it, there's then an adjustment, right, where you actually set the numbers. I mean, how does that work?
Adjustment? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Once it's passed by council, is there not an adjustment period after that?
Yes, it has to go to the city attorney's office, and the city attorney can explain in more detail the steps. It has to go to the city attorney to perform the amendments or the addendums to the street damage restoration fee ordinance, and that'll take its time to get done. So I'm not sure if the city attorney wants to add.
Is there any opportunity there for some of the numbers to be tweaked at that point?
Yes, there's always the opportunity to do that. That is my understanding.
Explain that, if you would. So the numbers that we see in front of us, are they set in stone, or are they being...
No, they're not set in stone because there are options for you to consider. Like, for example, we're asking you to eliminate, for example, the exemptions. Right now, if a utility company has an emergency, the utility company is exempt from paying fees. We're saying, no, they should pay for the excavation like everyone else. Right, and that, if you want to add that to the menu, to the options, that would generate by itself, in and out itself, enough revenue that we don't have today. So once we determine, Councilman, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, once that we determine, what the appetite of this council, is, then at that point we can estimate the anticipated revenue. But just by adopting the fee that we are recommending by itself, not the other recommendations, that would generate automatically over $100 million a year.
Mr. Rue.
Mr. Chair, I support everything before us, and I wanted to add a friendly amendment that we discussed, which is instructing the BOE to conduct an assessment of the bonding structures associated with trenching on concrete streets, and if necessary, amend the requisite bond amounts associated with street cuts on concrete streets.
I'm prepared. I appreciate all the questions to move forward with this, with that comment, and also Ms. Martinez's addition that we ask the departments to come back with their analysis prior to going to council. But with that, colleagues, unless there's additional questions, I'm going to recommend that we approve what's in front of us and move forward. And without objection, that'll be the order. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr.
And we'll move to the last item. And I know the hour is getting late. The public right-of-way reservation system, item number 3. Mr. Espinosa, if you could read that into the record.
Item number 3 is a report from the Bureau of Engineering relative to the public right-of-way reservation system and improvements to the public notification of construction activities within the public right-of-way.
All of that, and the proprietary departments, utilities, they can all weigh in then too.
That is, okay, do we have any public comments on this? No public speakers on this? Okay, so
We have no more public speakers on the queue.
Mr. Allen from the Bureau of Engineering. Excuse me.
Hi, good afternoon. Ted Allen, Deputy City Engineer with the Bureau of Engineering. I know it's been a long meeting, so I can give the short version of the report and then be happy to answer all the questions you have.
Great.
The public way reservation was created in the municipal code under section 62.251 back in 2006. It was initially started as a kind of a pilot program. Only downtown LA area was identified as an area that it would be implemented in at that time, and it was going to be a 12-month pilot. And as things sometimes happen over time, it worked well. It kind of was voluntarily rolled out citywide, but the municipal code was never really brought in line with that. And so a motion introduced by Council District 14 asked for some improvements to the public way reservation system that we currently have. In essence, the current system is a passive system, meaning it tracks all of people's proposed work, but it relies on them to coordinate with one another. And it's not a true public way reservation in that multiple entities can be shown in the system at the same time in the same place. And largely that's because of past city policies where utility permits, for example, are good for 6 months, so we can't lock people out for beyond that 6-month period. So we're in agreement in making improvements to our existing computer application, but in order to really make the computer application more effective, we need to make changes to some of our city codes and policies to refine the time period, for example, for utility permits. And there are many other examples given in the report. I'd be happy to answer any questions on those. But in essence, this report is recommending a short list of municipal code changes that we would work with the city attorney would work with us and other departments on to come back, and also that we will report back in 90 days with more detail on our proposed changes to our system that those code changes would enable. And lastly, it would request the Board of Public Works to create a uniform notification policy for people when permittees are doing work that impacts them.
Great. And were utility companies, DWP, consulted with regarding the proposal to reduce the 6-month time frame?
Not formally, but I've mentioned it to a few of them. In general, they've been supportive because it would enable us to give them less or more time as appropriate for the particular permit. One of the other changes in here, I have mentioned a few of them in meetings on other topics and whatnot, is removing the prohibition from us from extending permits. I'm not sure why that was put in the municipal code. It was probably some time ago before computers and whatnot, but currently when we issue a permit, it's good for 6 months and we're not allowed to extend it. And sometimes they run into hiccups in their project and then we have to cancel their permit and go through the process of issuing a new one. And it's not efficient for either one of us. So I know they're supportive of that side. I think most of them would be supportive of eliminating the 6-month period because we're still going to give them adequate time to do their work and we'll be able to adjust it if needed.
Colleagues, any additional questions?
Quickly, if I can. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in the original motion, this is a critical piece that have access to the public, and that's the real-time online portal data on the right-of-way.
So we
I just didn't see that in your BOE report.
Well, even the current system is real-time in that, let's say we issue a permit in the system, it instantly goes into PWRS and becomes available to everyone. But what the current system is lacking that most of us would like is if we tell an applicant A that, okay, you have this area reserved, if applicant B wants to come in and do work at the same time, same place, we'd say, no, someone else is going to be working there. Or, so close that it would be too much of a public
But it would
impact.
be flagged.
Yeah, And right now, the issue is that they all show that they're good for 6 months. So we really don't know when they're going to be there. And so the system might have 10 on a 2-block length. They may or may not conflict. So really what we need to do.
So you're saying it already exists, that's why it's not indicated in your report on the real time?
Some of that, well, we do plan to have improvements, but that's with our 90-day report back. We're proposing, we'll give you more detail in the 90-day report back of how we propose to either change our existing system, or maybe the city would want to do an RFP for an off-the-shelf system. We propose to do that detail in our 90-day report back, but we wanted to get as quickly as possible in front of you with these code changes to get those started so that the two would go in parallel.
Yeah, very user-friendly, like even an app. You think an app can be created?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Thank you.
Colleagues, any additional questions? Okay. I've got a couple of recommendations for the two minor things requested in terms of the recommendation. It's to amend the recommendations as follows. One is to request the city attorney draft an ordinance to effectuate recommendations A through F and H as discussed in the Bureau of Engineering's April 12 report with input from the Bureau of Contract Administration, BOE, and other city departments. Second, to direct the BOE with the assistance of the city attorney and the Department of Water and Power to report on options for clarifying the responsibilities of permittees. The report should include outreach to and input from other utilities. Third, to request that the Board of Public Works, with the assistance from the Department of Transportation, develop a standard notification procedure to create a uniform notice of permit applications to inform the public of certain construction activities such as lane closures, sidewalk closures, and parking removal. And finally, to direct the Bureau of Engineering, with the assistance of the Department of Transportation, the Bureau of Street Services, the Bureau of Contract Administration, the Information Technology Agency, and Film LA to report within 90 days with 1, an analysis and recommendation of improvements to the public right-of-way reservation system to develop a real-time right-of-way closure online portal, and 2, any budgetary needs necessary to implement an upgraded PWRS by July 2021. Without objection, that'll be the order, and that, I believe, is the last item on the agenda. Nope,
Thank you.
One more thing.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe we're just looking for clarification as to the recommendations for item number 2.
Okay, so we need reconsideration of that for a clarification, is that correct? Okay, so without objection, we will reconsider item 2, and the city attorney will give us a clarification for that item.
Yeah, I think the need for clarification arises as to what was actually before the committee. And the committee, the agenda talks about budget recommendation and control report, but then there's also a report from the Board of Public Works. So I think some clarification is needed to understand what exactly was before the committee. So the report that is from the Department of Public Works has a number of recommendations, including recommending the city attorney to prepare an ordinance. So I think clarification is necessary to understand what was before the committee and what was not before the committee. So
as I understand it, where the functional issue is before the committee, but if you want to clarify, Mr. Espinosa, what is before us as we reconsidering it now?
Well, I believe that what the chair would like is to approve the recommendations that were found within the Department of Public Works transmittal. And I believe there's 2 recommendations that were before that were submitted. Is that correct?
But I'm not sure, it was unclear to me whether that report was actually before the committee. That what was agendized was the budget recommendation and control report. So I would need to understand whether this constitutes either of those things.
So I would imagine we would want it to constitute the report that's in front of us, the SDRF update. Is that the question?
So was there a separate budget recommendation and control report?
We need to be very clear about the numbers that we're looking at. If you look in the report, on the pages are not numbered, but the street damage restoration fees, where it says functional only, and the 5-foot width of influence for the local street at $8.24 and the select at $19.44. That's what the Bureau brought in front of us. Is that correct? We have a
Wait,
representative
isn't a functional and structural effects, both of them?
So what I'm referring to is what was agendized and part of the record.
Transmittal number 2, does that clarify it?
Well, I'm looking at the agenda and the description for agenda item number 2. So I think it's important to clarify that this item was properly before the board. And I think there's some question as to when in this report was, part of the record and made available, because we do need to have the information before the board and publicly available, at the time the agenda is posted. And so it was unclear to me at what time the information that the committee purports to act on was actually available to the public in a way that they could, participate in. It's really a Brown Act issue.
Can we not make a specific recommendation? Regardless of what was before us there, we have a specific recommendation.
You can make a specific recommendation. The question is then it may be, if it wasn't properly within the record ahead of time, then what it may be, it'll go to council, but then it may just reopen the public comment at council.
What's it?
This item was heard before. The report from the Board of Public Works was approved by the Board of Public Works literally an hour before this meeting.
But it was heard by the Board of Public Works. It was heard and approved by the Board of Public Works, correct?
Today, yes.
And
just right shortly before this meeting.
Okay, and you're saying that's not enough time for us to hear it? Doesn't that happen with a lot of items?
This draft may have been before the committee. I just don't know when it was, part of the record and available to the public.
What is your recommendation, Mr. Attorney? I mean, we want to do this in the appropriate and legal fashion. We know what the will of the committee is, but we want to make sure that we're not in violation of the Brown Act.
We're trying to see when it was. We're trying to verify when this report was, basically available to the public. If you move forward, I think what may happen is, and I don't know if we can verify now what was properly before the board, properly before the committee.
So if it wasn't,
the
worst case scenario is that it would open up public comment in council.
Yes.
Okay. So that being said, we'll move forward with the understanding that it's possible that, depending on what your information reveals, that it could reopen Public Works. That's what I think that's what they're doing.
Well, 72. Yeah. We're looking at the council file record.
But regardless, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, our action can stand, and what you'll figure out is whether or not it will require a reopening of public comment.
Yes, that is my understanding.
But our action will be the same regardless. So I wonder if I can end this committee. If I end this committee, our action will, reinforcing our action stands. If you find that the timing was not proper, there wasn't enough notice, then that would necessitate a reopening of public comment in committee. I mean, in full council.
Yes.
And if you find that there was enough time, then it would not reopen. But our action would not be affected. Is that correct?
Correct.
So, am I safe to take the action and close this?
You may. You're on reconsideration now, and you'll make the clarifications necessary to refer to the specific street damage restoration fee that the Bureau
we're voting now as a committee on the specific recommendation that is before us on transmittal 2 under the functional only. That's the recommendation. Without objection, that is ordered, and you will do the research to figure out if that's going to require an additional public
We'll
comment.
make sure the council agenda properly reflects what they need to do, whether a hearing has been held or not.
Great, appreciate it, and sorry everyone for the confusion on that.
I do not know that.
It does not have a date right now.
Okay.
A date, sir.
So we have a little time to figure it out. Is there anything else before this committee?
No, Mr.
Colleagues,
Chair.
is there anything else? No? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.